Hello and welcome. This is ATACS episode 7. That sounds right. This is Sunday, February 12th, and we are bringing you another episode hot off the presses. That's how this works, I think. Checks out. I am hosting this week. I am Flex from Raleigh. Our normal host is not able to join us, so I am doing my best to fill his big shoes. Joining me, we have Ryan from New York. How's it going, Ryan?
Back for another round.
All right. And we also have Will from Greenville, North Carolina.
Yeah, Paul's got big shoes. So, I mean, you got your work cut out for you.
He does have quite large shoes. So yeah, it's quite warm and sunny here in Raleigh. It's nice, like 70 degrees. I don't know if that's going to last through the week, but it's feeling pretty good out there today. How's the weather in New York?
Cold, rainy, freezing rain.
That does not sound great. Does that cold and rainy weather provide you much gaming time?
It does.
Then let's talk about some video games. What have you been playing, Ryan?
Yeah, well, so I guess continuing from last podcast, I did manage to finish Alpha Protocol.
Very nice.
That was on my radar and managed to knock it out, which that game is interesting. Will sent me an article from PC Gamer that does a great job of summing it up. But basically, I would say it's kind of an Obsidian game, like an older style Obsidian game, like kind of flaws in the execution, but kind of a neat setting, at least from an RPG perspective, that kind of a like modernish Jason Bourne conspiracy kind of modern fantasy setting.
I do like Jason Bourne.
Yeah,
there's actually a Jason Bourne game that I played on the 360. I think it's called the Bourne Conspiracy or something like that.
It's pretty. I mean, it's kind of refreshing and it's pretty unique, at least from an RPG perspective, because there are probably some games like some Tom Clancy games that get into that stuff that I'm not as much into, but. And the dialogue and the writing are generally pretty good. So
yeah, is it still buggy?
Yes, it is quite buggy.
Did you play this game, Will? I forget.
I think I tried it once. Okay. I didn't get very far. I didn't know that. I don't think I had enough patience with it though.
Yeah. So I mean, you don't sound like super enthusiastic about it, Ryan. I guess I generally assume with Obsidian games that like their strengths oftentimes lie in their dialogue and their writing. Was that stuff strong as usual? And then what were the things that you didn't like as much? I've heard complaints. I mean, obviously the bugs probably were not good, but like I've heard complaints that like some of the character customization or maybe the combat or like other things like that maybe have some rough edges. I don't know if that's what you found. Full disclosure, I have not played this game at all. I'm just trying to dig in here.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I think reviews for that game tend to range from like the 70s to 80s or however you want to scale it. And that, I would say that's about right. Like, it's a game I don't regret playing, but it's also a game like probably wouldn't have regretted not playing. It was just kind of generally fun.
You could have lived without it.
Yeah, I mean, it does some cool things like I said, the setting was unique. You get some decisions in the story that seem pretty meaningful, which that's kind of an Obsidian hallmark. I mean, the gameplay is not necessarily bad. It's just with some of the bugs and the issues, and it doesn't do a lot in terms of variety. It's basically like a third person. You can play it different ways, but sort of a third person, like light stealthish thing, which that wasn't too bad. I mean, I played a character who was good at sneaking and pistols, which is apparently one of the strongest builds. And there were parts that were satisfying, like you could just kind of crouch walk everywhere, especially as your skill got high without having to worry too much. But there were also times that like, you know, the AI would spot you in a really wonky way that didn't make a lot of sense, or you know, some of the mission designs might be kind of goofy. Plus, like as the skills for that build, as the skills improve, the game gets really easy because you basically just walk to cover where you can see enemies, and then you line up headshots like from behind cover without even like having to aim and
Right.
pull the trigger and kill a bunch of guys, and just make sure you do it in such a way that they don't see each other go down. So it you know, that part of the game, it wasn't terrible, but a lot of times it ended up being kind of rote.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there were some mini games that I didn't hate them as bad as other people did, but they weren't particularly great.
Did it have a hacking mini game?
Did have a hacking mini game.
Perfect.
And
Nice.
the first time I tried it, I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
So,
One of the things I always think about with that game is like it came out around the same time as both Mass Effect 2 and Heavy Rain. Like all three of those games came out at almost the exact same time, and that's when everyone was like, oh, games and choices and like that stuff was getting big. I don't think you've played those other two games, but I've always been like tangentially curious, like if Alpha Protocol really did much in that realm that the other two games didn't. Because I played Heavy Rain and Mass Effect 2, and then Alpha Protocol was kind of the one I didn't play because of the bugs and other stuff I heard about. But that's something I've always been kind of curious about.
yeah, I heard some comparisons. I mean, my guess would be that you know, I played the first Mass Effect. My guess would be that maybe the gameplay was more interesting,
Yeah.
a little less buggy, because I think people like the second Mass Effect a lot better.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that was the sweet spot for that series.
So yeah, I don't know.
So what
Um,
made you want to pick it up, Ryan? I guess when you initially kind of made the decision to kind of to put this on the old backlog and then finally give it a run through, what were some of the factors that kind of made you lean that way?
I remember reading somewhere that they were aiming for something kind of interesting with their dialogue system, like this yes this notion of a loyalty system, which I think they actually did do pretty well with that. Like you can, you know, they don't give you a ton of dialogue options. Usually it's just like you can be like kind of a pervert, you can be like kind of an, you know, psycho, or you can be like a professional.
Which route did
Okay.
you go?
I tended to go pretty professional.
Okay.
I
Sure
mean,
you
and
did.
I'm bullying it down a bit. You know, sometimes you have more options, and you know, different things sometimes make sense. But those are kind of three big like dialogue archetypes, and different characters respond to those differently, and kind of, you know, you can become more friendly or more, you know, more hated by characters. Like, you know, if you approach certain girls and like shower them with attention, like, you know, a lot of professional women don't like that. They perceive you as a chauvinist, and rightly so. And so like you can get them really ticked at you.
Right.
And that, I think, you know, in terms of the dialogue, I mostly charmed everybody I met, and you could tell like it made some tweaks to the dialogue. Plus, you know, sometimes those characters that would unlock, they could help you out in certain missions and things like that. So,
Yeah.
and the game suggests that it rewards like doing the opposite as well. Like by ticking people off, sometimes you, you know, maybe it makes them easier to manipulate because they hate your guts or something like that. So,
But
but
you
yeah,
wouldn't know because you're quite the charmer.
that was I wouldn't know the way I played, but that was one thing that interested me about the game. Plus, I think
Cool.
I found it on sale for $3.
Yeah, it's been on. I have it in my backlog as well, and I bought it. Yeah, I think for like $3. It's been on sale for dirt cheap plenty of times. But I don't know that I'll actually get to it.
Yeah, that
Anything else you've been playing?
yeah, that was the game I finished. I knocked out a game called Hiragana Battle, which was a fun little JRPG. But lately, actually, so after I finished those games, I have picked up Final Fantasy 2 and Cook Serve Delicious. And I have been romping through those.
Fantastic choices.
As we talked about, I've had a bit of rainy day gaming time, and I have been thoroughly enjoying both of those games.
How's your beaver coming along?
I mean, Guy is just punching dudes and speaking beaver like nothing else. I mean, that's
it's really
what
a life
he does.
all of us aspire to live.
Like, I mean, my other characters.
I am lost.
My other Final Fantasy II characters, they use swords and spears and knives and white and black magic, but Guy, man, he just speaks beaver and punches people. And
we might need to catch Will up on this beaver speaking. So there's a moment in Final Fantasy II where,
spoiler alert.
Yeah, very minor spoilers here. And correct me if I forget any details because it's been at least a decade since I played this game. But you somehow get somewhere, basically get trapped somewhere off track or whatever, and you're like near all these beavers and you're trying to find your way back home or wherever you need to get to. And the only way you have to communicate, and you're trying to work out getting through a blocked dam or I don't know, something with these beavers, and you're trying to talk to them, and of course beavers and humans don't really understand each other, but this guy in your party whose name is literally Guy, he just pops up and he's like, and he kind of has pseudo caveman speak if I remember correctly anyway, and he basically just steps up and he's like, don't worry, Guy speak beaver.
Oh yeah, he doesn't even say don't worry, he just says Guy speak beaver.
Yeah. And he starts speaking beaver language with the beavers and he gets everything worked out and it's great.
Okay.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
All right.
It is pretty amazing. How have you been? So what version of Final Fantasy II are you playing?
I am playing the Android version, which I think is similar to the PSP version.
Okay.
I think that's right. I did some research because there are so many different versions.
Yeah, there's a dozen versions of every Final Fantasy game now.
And some of the mobile ports are based off of the GBA versions. Some of them are based off the PSP versions. Some of them are rehashed altogether. Some of them are based off the PC versions. It is a morass.
Yep, it's quite a thing to dig into. I played the GBA version. So how have you been liking? How much of Final Fantasy II have you played, and how have you liked it so far?
I think I'm about 12 or 13 hours in.
Okay, that's a good chunk.
And this version is good, and I actually am enjoying it on the tablet, which I was a little concerned with the Android translation wouldn't work out, the whole touchscreen thing, and it has crashed a couple times.
It does say you did get the best line, so the translation's good enough.
Yeah. From what I read, this port is close to what people consider one of the best modernizations of the game.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, as far as the game overall, I have been enjoying it. The thing that's most interesting to me about it is the leveling up system in that game, which is really unique.
Yeah, it's almost like an Elder Scrolls style thing where the more you use abilities, that's what makes them level up. So if you use the cure spell, your level in cure gets better. And that's interesting to see them try that in that type of game, and also especially since that game came out in I don't know, the 80s or something.
Yeah, and I mean, I find that a lot of different weapon types are viable. In my current party, I have 2 people dual wielding. I have a person using a weapon and shield, and I have a person using no weapons at all. Plus, they have a pretty deep black and white magic system, and you said, it is a really interesting way to level up. I mean, the game itself isn't super challenging, and that leveling up mechanism can become really gamey because basically you just equip the weakest version of a weapon and attack 50 times, and voila, you level up.
Speaking of gaming, the system, what I did, because I played the GBA version, so I was actually on my handheld, and there was a way to set your menu selection options to stay on the last thing you picked. And I was able to have basically the party members that needed to work on attack, I would, like you said, give them weak weapons and have them attack my own party members, and then have my healers cast cure on all my party members, and I just put something heavy on the button to leave it pressed, and I was fighting really weak enemies that weren't going to do much damage, and I basically just let it running for like an hour or two, and I went and did something else, and stuff would level up. So you can very, very easily game that system.
Yeah, yeah, that's a technique I've heard. I don't think it's quite as applicable to mobile, but yeah.
Right.
And I don't know, like it, I've definitely leveled up, not quite so aggressively, but just by equipping weak weapons and like bludgeoning my way through battles. And it is interesting, but then like, it makes your characters a little overpowered, and the rest
Yeah.
of the game becomes a bit of a slog because
Yeah.
that game, as many old RPGs, there is
Yep.
no like skip battles, skip weak monster spell like an Estoma or something that you can just throw on yourself and
Yeah.
skip
And it
weak.
is a lot of long dungeons and combat slog towards the end too, if I remember correctly.
But anyway,
And
overall,
beware of dragons and boxes when you open those treasure chests.
I haven't seen any dragons yet, but I did see a nasty looking manticore, and then I killed him in one hit.
Nice.
Um,
So a very similar
yeah.
game to Final Fantasy II. Tell me about Cook Serve Delicious.
So
Disclaimer,
Cook Serve
not similar at all.
Is there a beaver recipe?
Not that I've seen yet. That was a game, in sort of playing through games that I owned. I was looking through my list of games, and there were several long RPGs and some The Witcher and things like that. And I was like, man, I just finished Alpha Protocol. I'm playing Final Fantasy. It's like, what do I want to play? It's like, let's play Cook Serve Delicious.
Yes. Fantastic choice.
Let's play something a little bit faster. And that game is pretty rad, I have to say. I just made it to the 1-star restaurant, and I have finally managed to squeeze in a couple perfect days. That's upgrading your soup recipe is brutal.
Yeah. The soup recipes get. I think that was the thing I struggled with the most in the time I played. Like those can get really complicated.
Yeah, that game. I guess I think you played up to 2 or 3 stars, Flex.
No, I didn't play that far. I was 1 or maybe 2 stars. So you're probably about where I got to at this point.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Like because the game definitely has some meaningful progression. Like even though I've played several hours, I'm still a long ways away from unlocking.
Yeah.
Things.
That was what ultimately made me stop playing. Is like I played 5 or more hours and only got to 1 or maybe 2 stars. So like you would have to go a long time to get to 5 stars, and like your things do upgrade, but it's a fairly slow progression. That was my main thing with the game, is I wish it had a little bit of a faster progression, but like what I played of it, I really enjoyed.
Yeah. So I guess we'll have to see how that goes. Like I don't know if I'll burn out at some point. Towards the end of the moving from 0 to 1 star, I did notice like having to, because the game, like, of course doing better will give you more money to buy more food items and equipment and things like that. So I've been pushing to do that, but at the same time, like having to play a minimum 20 days to move from 0 to 1 star and then do that again. Like I've gotten to where I just make some quick menu adjustments and jump right back in, and that kind of speeds things up, but it does require kind of a lot of playing through the game days. And I guess for any of our listeners who aren't familiar with this game, like Cook Serve Delicious is a game where basically you're running this restaurant called Cook Serve Delicious, and it's just opened in this building. So you start at a 0-star restaurant, and you go in and you buy different types of food items. So you have you can kind of build your menu. So like your food items might be starting out with things like corn dogs and soda and pretzels and burgers, like some cheap food items, and then you get all the way up to like 5-star like fish and soup and lobster and things like that. But once you set up your menu, and your menu items have different advantages and disadvantages, that can have like meta effects or in-game effects. But basically, once you set up your menu, you go into a day, and customers come through, up to starting out 4 at a time, and they'll order different things, and you have a certain amount of time to fill the orders. So like a customer might come in and order a soda, so I have to, pull up that order. It brings up the soda machine, and then I have to like select the right soda, select the right cup size, see if they want ice or not, and put that order in. And as different customers come in, and you have different tasks to do all at the same time, and then you have like a rush hour where a ton of orders come in at once, and you have a time limit to do each of these. And some of the orders are very complicated, like you have to have a bunch of keyboard keys and like let it cook for a few seconds, and then once it hits the right temperature, you serve the order, like pressing the keyboard key to serve it. Like it becomes this like pretty exciting, like pretty intense juggling act. And little errors like hitting the wrong key and you put the wrong ingredient in your order like can make your customers angry at you. So it's
in some ways
it's
kind of like a glorified QuickTime event in some ways, but they also like they do it well enough, and like the balance of like making sure the right ingredients are, like watching the time limit, like juggling multiple orders at once, like it's a very fast-paced game that ends up being like really exciting and in a way that I enjoyed it.
And thematically it's cool too, because like I'm here at my restaurant and a guy comes in and orders an ice cream, and it's like, and he actually he wants vanilla and chocolate with nuts. Then the next guy comes in and he orders a steak, and then so I have to like marinate the steak and put it on the grill, and then the guy I press vanilla, chocolate, nuts, serve it up, like, and then the next ice cream, he might want like triple vanilla with sprinkles and and syrup or something like that. So it's kind of neat, like, and it keeps you on your toes with all the different varieties of food items you're having to prepare.
Yeah, definitely. That was a fun one. And Cook Serve Delicious 2 coming out this year in theory.
So I heard.
So we'll see if that makes it. But that is a fun one. Glad you had a chance to try it out. I'll be curious to follow up and see how far you get.
That's been a blast.
Yeah. What about you, Mr. Hit, Mr. Will? Have you been playing some games?
You know it, man. My main memory of Cook Serve Delicious is just your Steam background, which looks like this sort of tacky party wallpaper with like corn dogs and stuff on it or something like
that. For the record, my Steam background is Cook Serve Delicious, and I have yet to find anything better, so it's going to stay that way until I do.
So
look this up.
I have played, I've been working on a number of things. I'd say probably most of my time has been Metal Gear Solid 5, but I've also been playing some origami. I finished a game called Live Lock today. Been playing a game called Thea, The Awakening. I finished a first-person shooter that I started forever ago called Hard Reset, and I played maybe 20 minutes. Not really starting much at all of this game called Gemini Heroes Reborn that I had been sort of interested in seeing.
I've seen some things about that game.
Yeah, so that's
the first question I have for you, Mr. Hit. How many of these games are single-player games?
I would say Metal Gear Solid 5, Hard Reset, and Gemini. The rest of them are multiplayer.
So it's
a nice even
roughly
split.
half and half,
Yeah.
So I don't know that we'll dig into all of these. But
no. I had two that I felt like would be more interesting to talk about. But if you guys have questions on the others, of course.
Well, what are your two?
I
haven't heard about a lot of these games, so if you could give me like the elevator pitch for most of them.
Okay, yeah. So, the two I was thinking of talking about were Metal Gear Solid and Thea, The Awakening.
Okay.
But so I guess just to throw some things out there, Hard Reset is an old school Painkiller style first person shooter. Very difficult. Enemies are kind of coming at you from all these different directions and a lot of different varieties of enemies that different weapons are effective against. You kind of have these two main weapons that you can switch functions on, and all the weapons kind of have 4 or 5 different functions, which really are effectively different weapons, but they're all kind of on the same frame. it's got this sort of cyberpunk feel to it, where it's sort of like this kind of tech, this sort of tech world. Most of your enemies that you're fighting are like different varieties of like robots, and it's very it's very intense.
So thumbs up or thumbs down?
I'd say thumbs up probably. I mean, and I think most people who played that one, who like first-person shooters, probably dig it. I don't know if Fowler's going to talk about Origami because he said he hadn't played a ton over the last 2 weeks. Do you want?
That was kind of like one I wasn't sure on. I mean, we can talk about it since both of us have played it.
Okay. Well,
at least a little bit.
Ryan had asked for
at least an
a
intro.
quick little idea. So Origami is sort of, in some ways, to tell you the truth, it's kind of like a 3D. It's an attempt to kind of make a 3D Mark of the Ninja.
Okay.
So you've got.
Sounds auspicious.
So you're dealing with shadows. Your guy's basically. He has abilities that recharge in the shadows. He can't be seen in the shadows. He can teleport from one shadow to another. You collect scrolls in the game. You're basically a ninja. Some of the costumes look like exactly like some of the alternate costumes from Mark of the Ninja. I can't say that it nails it. Mark of the Ninja really has a level of polish that almost no stealth game can really touch. But the fact that it's co-op is fun. And it's just kind of, I mean, I think some of the stuff that it does is kind of clever and kind of fun. But that's kind of about what it is.
Yeah. I definitely agree that like I think Mark of the Ninja is still kind of the top dog there. I think Origami could give a little more feedback, especially on the noise front. Like there's no real feedback for like how much noise is being made.
Right.
So I think that's a little difficult. I think the other thing, like at the point we're at, I wish it would do is like find some way to like vary things up a little bit, because I feel like every encounter is like, here's a room with a bunch of dudes, get through it. But I definitely agree that it has some cool ideas going on, and like a lot of the core mechanics I think work pretty well. So it's a fun time, stealthing around.
There you go. Livelock is sort of like, did you ever play Alienation, Ryan?
I haven't.
It's sort of like a twin stick shooter with an upgrade system, kind of a cooperative thing. Cool. Yeah.
Livelock.
I'm trying to figure out a good way of kind of explaining it. Basically, you've got 3 different classes you could play as, and then each class has certain weapons and abilities that they unlock as you kind of progress through the game. I'd say really I don't think it does anything like totally groundbreaking, but everything that is there is very solid, So if someone likes, a twin stick shooter in an interesting environment with a pretty, I guess, substantial little upgrade system with some meaningful decisions to make, then they might like it. But yeah.
When you say, and I mean, this is a terrible example, but when you say twin stick shooter with upgrade system, that reminds me of what was that game with the cars?
Oh,
no, Helldivers was kind of fun actually. This game was pretty terrible.
With guitars?
No, cars.
All you're talking
around.
about Rampage? Well, no, what was that thing called? Was it something we played?
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of that game.
I think I know what you're talking about, and I can't remember it off the top. Renegade Ops?
That's right.
That's probably it, yeah. That game was...
No, this is...
shooter with upgrade.
I'd say this is probably better than that. Yeah, this is probably a little better, but it's kind of it's an interesting little thing. I don't think it's worth spending a ton of time chatting about that one. Let's see, and I think that's most of the other ones that I mentioned. So I guess I'll dive into the meaty bits. So Metal Gear Solid, how about that? It is about, I'd say,
a Hideo Kojima production.
It definitely is.
And don't you forget it.
Having come, this is really my first foray into this world. So I think it's kind of, I don't know if it needs to be or would always be this baffling for somebody who had never really
Right.
like played any of these games, you know. So I tried. I think I mentioned on the last podcast that I tried Metal Gear Solid 3 because I was told that it was, you know, one of the high points in stealth gaming, and found the control system to be just horrific. And there was plenty of other things that I was interested in playing at the time, and I guess I didn't really decide to go forward with it. Um, and so now I feel like I'm kind of entering, and I don't know that there's a, you know, you can tell that there are certain people that you see that are supposed to be real big deal, you know, like you see Revolver
Right.
Ocelot and this guy named Miller,
Yep.
um, and Snake, of course, and they all seem to be big players, but of course I don't have that background. So to me,
Yeah.
there's just, oh, here's this guy, Revolver Ocelot. I've heard that name before, but then of course when when you know you get to see the cinematic view of Revolver Ocelot, of course it's like, here he comes, the big man, Revolver Ocelot or whatever. I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, is it why is this guy neat? Um,
It's not doing it for you.
you know, so there's that sort of thing. Um, the thing that I think I'm kind of hypersensitive to is just the tonal inconsistency of the entire project.
Right.
You know, like really, you really can't, it can't really decide, or maybe doesn't want to decide to be a certain thing, in terms of being sort of a gritty military kind of stealth game, or kind of a weird base creation simulator thing. Sometimes
Right.
there are aspects of it that are like just tremendously silly and stupid. Um, like, you know, and so it's really just a mixture of all these things. I mean, but I guess for there's probably most people out there, you know, either have tried this or had no interest in it. Um, so I don't know how most people think about Metal Gear Solid. If they're
Yeah,
like, well, that's the,
it's really funny to hear you like coming into this with very little Metal Gear background because I mean like that
It's
series
probably
has built
semi-rare at this point.
yeah, like that series has built up such a large like I'm not a Metal Gear person, but I have been very aware of like the large and rabid fan base for that franchise and like it's been around for a long time and like people who are into Metal Gear know their Metal Gear and there's always like a lot of fan service and like its particular quirks have endeared themselves to people over the years. So like a lot of like listening to you talk about it, like a lot of the things that strike you as weird have been normal in the series in a lot of ways, and I think that's the
right.
kind of the stuff that fans like about it. Um,
Nice. Did you play Metal Gear Solid V or 5 or whatever they call it?
That's
no,
the
I
one
haven't.
I'm working on.
Okay.
Uh,
I was
Yeah.
curious if you had played the one
no,
that.
the only Metal Gear game I've played was the first Solid. I played for 2 or 3 hours and thought it controlled terribly and said I don't want to
There you
play this
go.
anymore
There you go.
and skipped all the rest. I do have the 5 versus V split is really funny.
Yeah.
I'll just say 5 though, for the sake of getting around that.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I am interested in trying 5 more than the others. Like I have no interest in going back and playing anything before 5 because my understanding is they have the similar control issues. But everything I've heard, 5 apparently controls much better than the previous games.
Yeah, and that's not something I can knock it for. I think it does
Right.
control fairly well.
hmm
Um,
The thing I've heard that actually Metal Gear Solid fans don't like about 5 as much, like from everything I've heard, like the open world and gameplay systems and controls is what people like that game for. The thing I've heard Metal Gear Solid fans complain about 5 is that actually its story is less prevalent and less weird, I guess, than the previous games have been because like people really like I don't think anyone really liked the way Solid 1 through 4 controlled, but people fell in love with those games just because they're completely insane anime story weirdness. And
yeah, I
I get
don't
the
know.
impression 5 kind of lost some of that. Like I think it has flashes of it in there still, but
Yeah,
um,
there's still some weirdness. I mean, you
yeah,
know,
I'm sure.
the predominant enemy is this guy called like Skullface, who looks
Yep.
kind of like Red Skull.
Yeah.
Um, like Captain America's nemesis. There are these guys called skulls who move around like some sort of like hyper-addled animals or something. I don't know. But basically, so sorry, it's all getting really vague and crazy, which is what happens when you talk about Metal Gear Solid or play Metal Gear Solid.
Maybe
that's legit.
Kojima in general.
Yeah,
Unless
so
he makes anything else.
most of the game is you building this giant base in the ocean, with and building it with materials that you find out in the field and staffing it with guys that you find out in the field.
Yeah, that you Fulton from the field.
That you Fulton out. And I will say that in some ways the Fulton is kind of an elegant solution to certain. So I mean, it is really nice when you have to like rescue a prisoner, and then all you have to do is just get him out in open sky. If you just get him out of a building, that's all you need to do to rescue him, because then you can just Fulton him up into the air. And the Fulton is basically this balloon system that you can put on anything after a while. Like, so now I've got it to where I can Fulton a tank, I can Fulton a guy, I can Fulton an animal, I can Fulton a mounted gun.
Can you Fulton D-Horse?
That sounds pretty elegant.
And so in some ways,
I just picture like all these things flying up.
Right. And you can call them back in when you need them. So let's say I need that tank later, I can have it delivered back. So that's sort of an interesting sort of battlefield management type thing. So most of the game is sort of, you'll have an objective like, go in here and take out this installment. So, you'll come in on the helicopter, you'll get to the area, do whatever that objective is, then get back out and extract using the helicopter. Now, I would say probably in my view, one of the top 1 or 2 most irritating things about that game is how much time you spend just doing absolutely nothing.
Right.
You're at the base and you're like, hey, I want the helicopter to come get me. You have to stand there on the base for about 30 seconds, watch the helicopter fly in, maybe even take a minute sometimes actually, and then watch the helicopter fly in. It picks you up. Then you just sit there staring at the water for a minute as the helicopter flies off. Then your guy gets up and closes the door, and then you go sit down in the helicopter. You pick your mission, and then you have a little loading screen, and then it shows your helicopter bringing you into the mission zone. And that usually takes about a minute and a half of you just sort of flying up Afghan desert. You finally drop out of the chopper. Then typically you have about a 5-minute horse ride to get to the actual area where the mission takes place. And then when you extract, it's all the same thing in reverse. So you hop into the chopper, you fly away, you're just staring at the desert. The mission doesn't end, it doesn't go blank. You just sort of, and so I guess in some ways it's like maybe it's in some ways more believable or more real the way that you get in and get out of these places. But then again, this is in a game that has Fulton extraction. And,
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like, I mean, those games have always like put a very like, they've always been very meticulous about like the seemingly smallest little details in ways that do make it take time to do things that don't feel like they should take time, but then they also like are really meticulous about like their weird stuff, and like it's like they're trying to be quote unquote realistic with like the amount of time things take, but then it's also just it's also completely ridiculous anime stuff going on as well.
And unfortunately, I wish I had a more coherent version. I wish I had a more coherent way of talking about this game but I think I'm still so incredibly confused about so many aspects of this game that I can't really present it in a way that really is any kind of is coherent. And maybe that's because it's just not coherent. I don't.
Yeah. So I guess the thing is like I don't think that's just you. It is kind of cool to hear somebody who hasn't had much exposure to this.
My main character has a horn on his head. I have no idea why. I have no idea why I have a horn.
The thing is, and I think Ryan's probably getting to this, is you're probably not really meant to.
Yeah, like the thing is like, and I guess maybe unfortunately for our listeners, we don't have any Kojima fans on the panel. Like, but I played the NES Metal Gear and the first 4 Metal Gear Solid games, and 4 completely lost me. Like at this point, I just kind of don't want anything to do with the series because, the first game, it was an NES game, but it was a pretty cool like stealth game for the time, like with like a story about infiltrating like a base in Afghanistan that was kind of neat. But then one thing I thought that was pretty special about the first Metal Gear Solid game, aside from the fact that it was one of the early 3D kind of groundbreaking titles, is that it did do a lot of cool things in terms of like those meticulous details. Like, there were certain situations where you could hide in a cardboard box, or you could like, it's a stealth game where you can tap on a wall and get somebody's attention and then like set up an ambush or sneak around them. Like it had all these little things. You could escape from prison by stealing a ketchup jar and making it look like you had bled to death. Like it had all these little details in addition to the story, like, which had some anime plot points, but like I felt like was semi-grounded, in the sense that it wasn't, for a sci-fi game, wasn't completely off the charts.
Right, right.
So it did do some pretty cool things, but the second and third games like got increasingly weird. Gameplay was still pretty fun. I mean, clunky controls notwithstanding, like you could still kind of stealth your way or shoot your way through a lot of situations. They did have a lot of those story tie-ins and details that made it really interesting. But by the fourth game, I was just like, man, the story just keeps getting weirder and weirder and weirder.
I think the fourth one was also the one that just went like orders of magnitude more over the top than any, like it just kept ramping up.
Yeah, so, I mean, in the second one, they kind of build up this conspiracy, and even though it's not really, it's kind of wild and out there, it's like, okay, well, they went for something big. And the third one is like kind of a backstory, and it had some really cool
Snake Eater.
Yeah, it had some really cool things, and the camouflage system was kind of neat. But yeah, the fourth game, just like, I was like, I've played all these games and I don't know what's going on, and like I'm just kind of through with this. Like the gameplay is not fun enough that
I've heard Metal Gear super fans not be able to explain what happens in those games because it's just all a big mess.
So I guess just to sum it all up, I think the things that I like about the game, I think that Fulton system is kind of elegant. I think that the loop is kind of compelling, and the loop basically being you going into the areas, finding every time you mark an enemy with your binoculars, it tells you what his skills are, and so as you spend more time in the areas, you kind of have this loop of, you may have a full team of R&D guys, but maybe the guys at the very bottom of your team are actually kind of terrible at R&D. So you find a new guy with a good R&D skill, you Fulton him out, and then when he gets to be part of your team back at your base, it ups your overall rank in R&D. And then you have access to new research projects, which might be a better gun or a better Fulton system or another night vision goggles or something. And so that kind of loop of, getting the guys up in your team level, getting new stuff to go out, it's kind of interesting. The things I don't like are just the crazy, amount of time that you spend doing nothing. Flying around on the helicopter, wandering around waiting for the helicopter to get there. Just, to me, I feel like it's crazy to me. But anyway.
And that's a good point, because, I mean, that game, like, honestly, the main reason I haven't tried this game yet is because, like, and every estimate I hear is, like, this is a minimum, like, 60, 70-hour game. Usually I even hear numbers higher than that. And then hearing that a lot of that time is also not doing anything makes me think, like, oh, that's even worse.
Yeah. And I feel like the stealth environments, like, a lot of the environments are very similar. I mean, most of the bases are very similar. You may have, 2 or 3 ground, like 1-story buildings, 1 2-story building, and then there might be like a watchtower with a guy in it. And then there might be a little part at the beginning, at the front of this little installation where there's some sandbags and a mounted gun or something. But I would say that like 80% of the installations I've seen are that way. So although, the guys may be, I think the variety comes in, you first go in there, you kind of come up with a way that's really effective at dealing with all the guys. Then the game makes a big deal of this, and people who like the game make a big deal of this. After you do things for a while, let's say you do nothing but shoot people in the head, you're going to start running into guard posts where guys have helmets. So that's sort of like the game tries to kind of figure out what you like to do and switch it up. And so that's sort of a little bit where I guess the challenge or the interesting aspect of the stealth comes in. But to me, like the stealth games I like the most are things like Splinter Cell Conviction, Deus Ex, stuff like that. Those are the ones I've played recently that I guess I thought have really been interesting. And there are things like different vent systems, or maybe rooftop entrances, or pipes that like go up across the ceiling that you can kind of hang from. And these different, like, I think the environments themselves are really kind of an interesting aspect of those games, and that's something that I feel like is missing in Metal Gear. Like, most of the ways that you get in buildings are just doors or windows. There's not really any any sort of pipes or any sort of vents or any sort of roof entrances or anything. So to me, like, a lot of those things that you mentioned, Ryan, are in there. I mean, you can throw an empty magazine and that'll get people's attention. You can throw a decoy. That's one of these tonally inconsistent things where you throw this little inflatable snake decoy, and then of course you can walk around in a cardboard box, which I categorically refuse to do that because I think it's ridiculous. And you can apparently paint the top of the box with like a pinup, like some sort of Japanese anime pinup, and then walk up to an enemy and then prop the box up, and apparently the guard will just become flustered with this beautiful cartoon pinup, and then you can like shoot him or take him down or something, which are all things that I don't do.
Oh boy.
but that's kind of the pros and cons.
That is a lot of Kojima time on the podcast.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I couldn't cut it down.
Well, I'll be curious to see how that goes as you continue.
It's overrated, but he naturally grows to fit whatever discussion.
Yeah. So then the other thing I've been messing with, and I probably played that for the last time, I'm probably going to play it last night, was a game called Thea, The Awakening, which it was advertised. It was like featured, I think, on the Steam homepage for a while. And then, of course, they came out with a free cooperative DLC. And so I was looking at it a little bit then, and it didn't quite pique my interest enough to cause me to dive in. And then I saw it on Extra Credits, Games You Might Not Have Tried, which is Extra Credits is a separate podcast on YouTube that talks about or not even really a podcast, it's a video series, I guess. But anyway, so they talked about it being something that would be just kind of interesting to see what it was all about, and they kind of equated it to, they said it was similar to the first few turns in a Civilization game. And I guess kind of what they meant by that is trying to sort of, you've got a settlement, and it's laid out just like Civ. It's kind of hexes, sort of like a turn-based hex strategy game, where you've got resources on the different hexes, you've got a village, but instead of sort of having a certain number of population and a certain number of sort of soldier units, you actually have named villagers, and each named villager kind of has a certain skill set and class, and you're kind of wandering around the map, trying to basically deal with these events that are kind of random and pulled from a big database. So you may find like a little, like there are these, like for instance, last night I found these fairies that wanted to play hide and seek with me. And then, of course, if you decide to play hide and seek with them, you might do a challenge based on the characteristics of the group that you have that you're walking around with. And then if you beat them, then maybe you'll get something from them. If you don't, then maybe they'll end up sort of getting you lost or something. And then there are combat encounters and different skill challenges, things like that. And I guess the issue is that the game is, painfully slow. I played for 11 hours and didn't even get close to finishing a game of it.
Right.
But I guess that was kind of about kind of what it was. And so I guess that you could say that it was kind of like the first turns of Civ, and there were certain things that it did that were a little bit more interesting, certain things that weren't.
Yeah, well, it's funny you describe it as being the first few turns of Civ and then playing 11 hours and not even finishing a game because like I play of an entire game of Civ in under 11 hours.
Right, right.
So that's really weird to make the first few turns of Civ take longer than a full Civ game.
Yeah, and I guess what they're referring to there is the fact that at the beginning of Civ, you don't really have a lot of the map. You know, you're
Right.
looking around for like, you know, encampments for barbarians and like little things on the map that you might be able to use to help your city grow a little bit faster. You're looking for kind of like where the resources are. And then I guess in the mid game of Civ to the late game, I mean, most of the map has been kind of explored,
Yeah.
and people are kind of just building their armies and researching their tech and stuff like that. But it's almost like the entire game of Thea is that part, just walking
Okay.
around hexes, and the hexes don't stay. The fog of war is really, really domineering, I guess, for lack of a better word, in
Yeah.
that game. And as soon as you depart, it kind of covers up, and something else could come back and be on that hex later too. So it's not like you clear the event and then you're done with that area. It's almost like things keep going and then coming in the same area surrounding your base, but then the map is so much bigger than that as well too. So it's kind of an imperfect monster, but it had neat aspirations, we'll say.
So overall, is it something that you would say is probably not worth the time, or
Yes,
it's
absolutely. Yeah, I would absolutely say it's not worth the time. But yeah, it was. I mean, it was neat to try it, and bravo for those guys for trying to do something kind of interesting. But no, I couldn't.
Cool.
I couldn't recommend it. But yeah, those are the two that were probably the most. I either had the most to say about them, or they were the most different, I guess, from the mainstream games that people see.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, as for me, I haven't had a ton of gaming time, but I did touch a few things. I'll do them pretty briefly each. I did finally, just to say for the record, I did finally finish the Pokemon Moon main campaign.
And
Finally went back and wrapped that up. I haven't really been enamored with the campaigns in the Pokemon games for a while, so this kind of continued that trend. I think the campaigns just kind of have diminishing returns because they're very similar. So I haven't dug into any post game yet. I think that's where the meat of these games has been for me the past few generations. So that's still to be determined. I definitely need a Pokemon break right now because like last weekend I like kind of powered through a lot of it. So we'll see where that ends up going.
I'll be interested to hear what you think about that too, because I've poked around with the post game, and there are a couple things that look interesting to me, but nothing really grabbing me. Plus, like you said, with this, since it's become sort of a yearly franchise, I think there's a bit of a burnout factor.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. Like for whatever reason, my like excitement to really dig into this more is not there at the moment. Maybe it'll come with a little bit of a break. I'm not sure. So I'm kind of taking that break right now, and I'll feel it out and see how I go. I'm almost certain I'll definitely at least pick it back up and look through some of the post game stuff and get a better feel for it. None of the like new Pokemon are really inspiring me either, so I think that's part of it. Like there are maybe a handful that seem kind of neat, but nothing that's like super grabbing me. Which could just be again the fatigue kind of getting me, because there has been a whole lot of Pokemon in the past few years.
Well, yeah, and I mean, this game in some ways didn't do a ton new, and a lot of the new stuff is like legendary or pseudo-legendary, which is its own game.
I did notice that how many legendaries there are. Yeah, and I guess that was the other point. What you mentioned is like this one feels like one of the smaller steps for a new generation. Like it really just kind of feels like a continuation of Gen 6. But so
do you kind of compare those, or we've all kind of been into Magic at one time or another? I mean, I guess can you compare it to like a block that doesn't have very interesting mechanics or does something that a previous block did kind of and just continues on in that fashion. So, for instance, there was a tribal block, so if there was a new block that came in and it was all tribal and most of the mechanics were similar to the previous tribal mechanics, could that be equivalent in some ways to an unexciting Pokemon game, or is it kind of different? Is that comparing apples to oranges,
Yeah, that's a little bit of apples to oranges because like Pokemon kind of builds on itself. Like you never like when you cycle out a block in Magic, you lose cards, you lose old cards and get new cards. Pokemon always still has the old Pokemon.
Well, I guess if you're playing vintage, then
I mean that's not a terrible analogy though, right? Because when a core set comes out, even though the current competitive block might get new cards, like a lot of those cards tend to be like a familiar flavor or just a reprint, and that is one thing that this game did a lot of. It reused the Gen 1 Pokemon and maybe just
I guess with the Alola forms, yeah.
I guess I'm just thinking of like the teams that you make in comparison to decks,
Yeah.
So I don't know.
No, that's not a terrible analogy because this does have the fewest new characters, and the mechanics it did there weren't that many, and they don't.
Hopefully some of our listeners have played Magic, or else that will just even be more confusing, probably.
They probably all do. I don't know. But yeah, that's actually probably the game I spent the most time on. Happy to have the campaign done, and we'll see where I go from there with it. Another game I've played a little bit of, which is kind of neat. It's called Limelight, and it's a puzzle game. And it's funny. Like if you watch a trailer for it, it bills itself as like, what if you stripped a game down to like its bare essentials or something like that? Which I can kind of see what they're saying, but like it's also like not really any more stripped down than like a lot of other focused puzzle games. But it's like weirdly zen to play it, which is kind of what I've liked about it so far. Like you're controlling this light that moves along a line, and like you'll have branches in the lines and the paths you can move, but you're navigating all these obstacles and puzzling your way through. But like it's got some like really chill music, and the visuals are really soft and appealing. So it's like, I don't know, it's something kind of nice to just zen out to, like at the end of the day or something. But I'll see how that goes. I'll continue playing that. I'm not super far into it. The other thing I've played a little bit of is Valhalla Cyberpunk Bartender Action. I think I got that name right. Which is like, it's predominantly a visual novel, which means you're mostly just clicking through dialogue, which I didn't realize exactly how much of a visual novel it was going into it. But I heard some good things about it last year. And I kind of have like a love-hate relationship with visual novel type stuff sometimes. And I think this one for me is probably falling more on the hate end thus far, because so far it has not grabbed me at all. I've probably played like 2 hours or so. And I can't quite pinpoint exactly. I mean, I'm sure, given that I'm just reading a lot, I'm sure a lot of that just deals with the story not really grabbing me. Because you play like a bartender in a cyberpunk future. So you just have a bunch of weird, eccentric. And this game is very anime in its style. So you just have a bunch of weird, eccentric, patrons come into your bar, and they basically just chat at you and tell you about what's going on. Which I could see where that could provide some interesting material, but for whatever reason it hasn't really grabbed me, and it also means it's not lending itself to like any kind of big overarching plot. It's just like a bunch of little snippets of conversations with people. I mean, and there is a certain charm to the writing, but at the same time, it's like, I guess the thought of like doing a dozen or however many hours of just kind of these goofy conversations is like, I don't know if I'm necessarily up for that. So we'll see where it goes. And there's almost like nothing in that. Like every now and then you'll serve it, like they'll ask like, oh, give me this drink, and then there's like, you basically just click on a few buttons to serve them a drink, which is not a challenge at all.
Like cook, serve, delicious.
Yeah, imagine cook, serve, delicious if you had infinite time.
Yeah.
That's basically what you're doing.
So,
Um,
how do you compare, or I guess how does anyone compare like visual novels to like walking simulators, or is that sort of a similar thing in terms of genre? Or I guess what are other visual novels that you've played, and how do you feel like people in general, even if not as accurately as they perhaps could, define visual novels?
yeah, I mean, visual novel, like when I think of it, it's pretty much like you really are just clicking through dialogue. Like it's almost like someone took a comic book and just turned it into a video game, and you're just clicking through the pages.
Okay.
Um, so there's real like when we talk about walking simulators, like you are controlling something and walking around.
Okay.
Um, like at least in the case of Valhalla, like you are literally like the entire game screen, at least for the 2 hours I've played, has been this one screen, um, and you're clicking through dialogue. Um, that's really it. So like some of the visual novels I've enjoyed more have been like um, 999. I liked a lot. Danganronpa was pretty entertaining. You could maybe call like Phoenix Wright a visual novel to some degree, even though that you do like click around to go to different rooms. So that's probably more like point and click adventure style. Point and
Right.
click adventure is probably like the closest analogy for visual novels, but visual novels
Oh
will just
man.
have less pointing and clicking and more reading dialogue.
Yeah, well, I
Um,
don't really like point and click adventure.
I mean, I guess a visual novel, the maybe the only advantage to it being in a video game format is like if you've ever read a choose your own adventure book, they have you kind of
yes.
like bounce around different pages and like plus the visual novel can add in like animation and
Yeah.
visuals. But in theory that could be executed uh, like a
Yeah.
book format or a pure
Yeah,
paper format.
that's a good, yeah, that's a very good point because like when I think of the ones I like take 999 for example, there is a lot of decision points in that game. Like that game has a big mystery going on and there's a lot of decision points that you engage with and it does some really interesting stuff with those decision points and I think that makes it a lot more engaging for me at least in that yeah, it's kind of like taking a choose your own adventure style thing. You know, there are visuals to it now and then like having that underlying mystery to kind of that you're working towards or pulling you through. Like I think all of that stuff helps a lot. Where Valhalla, at least so far, has presented no kind of decision points or really any input at all. So it really is just reading through this story that also, thus far at least, has no real through line. Like some of the characters are certainly entertaining and like there is some charm to the writing, but it really is something that like they could have done this in a comic book or a book and I don't or a novel and I don't think it would have really like I don't know that it really gains much for like I mean there's almost no interactivity at all so like it really doesn't gain much from being a game from what I've seen so far.
I've heard a
But
lot of good things about this one called Steins Gate, but I've never played it.
Oh,
right.
that's
Have you heard?
actually that's
Have you
an
guys heard?
anime.
Okay.
And I guess maybe it
Yeah, I think
also has a video game adaptation or
Oh, okay. But yeah, I haven't played it or anything, but that's the one that you know, I guess I've heard the most about in terms of visual novel.
yeah. I will say though it has a pretty awesome soundtrack. So I'll give it points for that. Um for whatever that's worth. But yeah, I actually don't even know if I'll end up playing a whole lot more of it because it's just last time I sat down to play, it was like I just don't. I want to play. I want to go play other things instead. Like that's really what it comes down to. Is when I'm playing it, it's like I would. There are other things I would just rather play.
that setting sounds pretty unique though. I mean,
The setting, yeah,
I don't know
and
if I'd want to play a bartender, but the idea of being in some kind of like central location in the cyberpunk world, I could certainly imagine seeing some interesting things
yeah, and
happening.
like the bartender setting gives them a lot of flexibility of like just having different customers come in who are all very different people, and like I think they do a really good job with that setting and with the characters they're able to create. Like I
Oh
think like
yeah.
the actual writing and the characters I think are all actually pretty good. Um, I just feel like it needs something more to make it worth sitting down for that many hours and clicking through it. Is kind of the thing for me personally. But yeah, like I think the setting and characters are totally solid. Um, it's it definitely gets really eccentric and charming with its writing. So it's certainly not all bad.
Sounds real.
Well, I think with that, we're going to take a short break here, and then we have a handful of pieces of news to talk about. So we'll be digging into that. So stay tuned after the break for some news. Welcome back to ATACS episode 7. This is Adults Talk About Cool Stuff. I'm your host Flex this week, joined by Ryan and Will, and we are moving into the news section of this show. Right up top, the big thing that I've seen tons and tons of stories about the past few weeks is, I think this has been going on for a while, but it's just kind of come to light recently, is GameStop's Circle of Life program. This is something that's really trying to, from what I understand, it comes from the very top of GameSpot corporate or whatever, and they're really trying to incentivize their employees to focus more on pre-orders. They have 4 points of the Circle of Life program. It's pre-orders, reward card subscriptions, used game sales, and game trade-ins, which, no surprise, those are the things that GameStop makes its most money on. And it seems like they're really doubling down on those things. And, there's probably a larger thing there of, like, with digital becoming so big, I'm sure stores like GameStop are having a much tougher time gaining traction. But apparently this is causing all sorts of stress for employees, because I don't know exactly the details of, like, how this works at each store, but they're apparently judging performance of stores based on what percentage of transactions in the stores contain those 4 points. And notice what's not in those 4 points are new game sales. So in other words, if you sell a new game to a customer without attaching either a pre-order, card subscription, used game, or trade-in to that interaction, then your quote-unquote Circle of Life score, or whatever you call it, will actually go down. So there's been a lot of, like, testimonials or whatever you want to call it from GameStop employees saying, like, that's putting a lot of extra stress on them, and, like, in some ways, and here's really, like, the kind of worrying part of it is that, like, to try and avoid being fired, employees will apparently, just resort to telling customers they don't have a new game if they don't want to sell it to them and hurt their Circle of Life score. So it ends up being, like, this really, really sketchy system that's going on. And then on top of that, you have, like, some store managers or higher ups in GameStop, of course, reaching out and saying, like, no, we would never encourage our employees to lie to customers or do anything like that. And then there was a really interesting article on Kotaku that was basically just a collection of employees and managers and all sorts of people from GameStop writing in, which it's a really long but also fascinating read, and it seems like a whole big mess right now. And GameStop is not, I mean, I haven't been there to any of their stores in a long time because they're not exactly new to, semi-shady things, but this even for GameStop seems like extra manipulative and shady.
I mean, honestly, to me, like, this almost feels like it's not news in a couple of ways. Like, for one thing, like, big corporations are notorious for making bad decisions at high levels, or creating incentive structures without thinking them through. And I guess, so in that sense, like, it's almost like not that surprising to see something like this come down and, like, a very, like, tone deaf approach from the top. It's like, well, we're not really doing anything wrong. We think this is, power to the players. This is great. It's value for our customers. But the other thing is what you've alluded to. I mean, I quit going to GameStop mostly. I mean, every now and then I'll drop in to pick something up. But in the past 7 or so years, I mean, there was definitely a day before digital exploded and Steam sales became so aggressive, and Amazon and Best Buy got into the market competitively, like where GameStop was the big game in town, and the used game market was a great way to go. They had their ups and downs, but generally, they were a pretty good place to do business. But over time, you could definitely tell, like, not only are there other good options, and even just digital, like sometimes it just feels like a better value to buy digital.
Yeah.
But also, uh, I kind of wish Paul was on the podcast because you would go in and the GameStop employee would just be constantly trying to sell you.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and I mean, that had to be coming from some incentive, and
Yeah.
it's not, it became this like really uncomfortable, pushy thing where it's like, I know what I want. I want this game. Like I'm giving you business. Like,
Hmm.
I understand if you want to pitch something, but like once I say no once, that's it. Like,
Right.
do not try to sell me on the virtues of Resident Evil 5 pre-order or whatever. Like, if I don't want it, I don't want it. I'll pick it up later.
Right.
Right.
And I mean, and there's an issue with you there too, because you didn't want Resident Evil 5. The game was fantastic.
Well,
But
I mean, wait,
I was
let's
just.
Gears of
That's
War.
all right. Let's stay on point here.
Yeah. Let's make up some pre-order that there.
Soul Brain Night of Darkness. I mean, you didn't want Soul Brain.
Max
They were trying to
Payne
sell
or
it to you really
Kane
hard.
and Lynch. Kane and Lynch 2. There we go. All right. So they're trying to sell me a pre-order of Kane and Lynch 2, which is a hot new game. Like that's okay, man. I really don't want it.
And I think for me the difficult thing is, and I don't think that I'm I don't think I'm overly empathetic, but I have a difficult time in a lot of situations like this, and I think that's one of the reasons that I much prefer buying everything, online. Um, Even going to things like farmers markets, that it's like the livelihood, of the person that you're sitting. You may walk by a table at the farmers market, and you can tell that no one's been there in a while, and the person's got their stock there, and I mean, this may be their full-time job, and so sometimes, of course, you feel like, gosh, this is rough for you, just staying here for all these hours with all this inventory, and it's always been a little bit uncomfortable to me because, it did seem like there was more to it, yeah, in a way. And I guess,
Right.
to me, GameStop has felt that way for a while, and with Ryan saying that this is not news, in a way, it's not. I think anybody who knows anyone who has worked at GameStop is familiar with the circle of life, if not by name, then by design. But I will say that to me, it's really sad because I think that some of the biggest people who are caught in the crossfire, in some ways, I feel like these kids are in some ways manipulated. I don't know. I guess when you're in high school, you don't have a lot of marketable skills. You find a job working in a video game store, and maybe you're passionate about video games. Maybe you think it's something that's pretty exciting, and then it's almost like such a rude awakening, to see this corporate structure sort of imposed from up top, and there have been times that I've gone in, maybe I bought a used game, and GameStop has at least they had, I haven't been there in a while, the 7-day return policy, where if you don't like the
Hmm.
game, you can bring it back within 7 days and get a full refund. And some of the GameStop employees are obviously less adept at hiding their facial expressions and feelings than others, and I'm realized sometimes, it's like you realize that somehow this is hurting them, after hearing some of these these stories about like how many pre-orders they're supposed to get, and the pressure that's put on them. And there's even been times I've gone in there, and if I actually did have a pre-order to make back when I still pre-ordered things, I would actually ask. I say, well, who hasn't gotten any pre-orders today? And I'll ask them to ring me up because I know how manipulative and bullshit that structure is. But
Right.
it seems like there's so much opportunity there in a way too. I mean, for an interesting
retail video game store. I mean, these things are everywhere. I don't know, just even thinking over the break about, you know, what if there was a room in the back where they had some consoles set up? You know, I'm sure that would require a little bit more manpower to actually
Right.
sort of monitor something like that. But
Yeah, and I have seen consoles set up in some GameStops.
yeah, but they're usually like up at the front. It's not like,
Right.
and it's for one person usually.
Right.
But I guess it just seems to me like it, you know, in some ways, I think games are, you know, are kind of can be an isolating kind of habit, you know, or an isolating pastime. And I think that, you know, in my own dreamy rose-colored glasses way, I think that, you know, GameStop could be an interesting way for gamers to meet other
Yeah.
gamers. And instead, it's just turned into this very, very toxic, pushy, irritating situation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
I mean,
you'd
it's
like to
been
think there's a better way to do a gaming store that embraces the culture and like makes it a fun place for people to hang out, but it is like GameStop is so like it's just such a
it's not
huge
that. Yeah.
omnipresent business that's clearly very focused on their bottom line, which does not come from new game sales. So yeah, and it leads to all sorts of problems. And like I totally get why in a lot of ways this isn't news, because for sure GameStop has been kind of shady for a while. But it still struck me like the quote unquote Circle of Life program is, I think, started just a few months ago. And it struck me like how, like the reports I've read, like how much more prevalent this seems to be in the way it affects the stores. Like it, from everything I've read, it's had a pretty substantial effect on the employees at all these stores. I don't know as much how it's affected customers. Like maybe to customers it doesn't. Maybe it's not as obvious, but
Well, I
even
guess, I
stuff
mean,
like
if you're already getting pushed, if you're already being so pushy trying to sell things, I
Yeah.
guess you can only be so much more pushy before people just like, you know, storm out of the building or
yeah.
something.
Yeah,
One
well, and I
one of
mean,
the funniest examples, just one quick aside, is apparently Watch Dogs 2 was on sale for $30 new at one point over the holidays. But they were still selling their used copies for $55. So like you have like, you know, a new copy for 30 and a used for 55, and the employees are still trying to push the used copy on people, and it's like it's just ridiculous.
well, yeah, and I mean, again, it's been happening. GameStop knows they can treat their employees poorly because people want to work with video games. Like, you know, they've had this incentive structure for a long time, and at the end of the day, it's a worse. I mean, the customer experience suffers for it. Like Paul and myself, like, do not, and I think Flex and maybe
Yeah,
you
I'm
as
in that
well,
boat
will
too.
like,
Yeah.
we just don't like going to GameStop anymore
No.
because we've had enough bad experiences or awkward experiences. Like, you know,
Yeah.
and it used to be kind of the place to go, but the moral of the story is basically don't shop at GameStop. Like,
Yeah.
Right.
you don't know what
I've been
your
off that.
experience is going to be, and it's
Yeah,
probably
I've been
not
off
going to
that
be
train for
good.
years, and yeah, I've been off out of
Yeah,
that
and
for
even in the
years, and
past,
it sounds like it's just getting worse.
you know, there were some reports of I think employees could somehow take games home and play them, and so people were getting these quote unquote new games in open cases. I remember that was a report that sort of kind of came out a couple
Yeah.
of years ago. So that was the last. It was the last in a long line of
I may have
shady.
had that happen to me before.
Yeah, of shadiness. You know.
Yeah. But yeah,
Uh,
I guess bottom line is GameStop still. It's I mean, all of these signs from what I've read seems like it's just, you know, quote unquote worse than ever, in the way they're running things, and it makes me wonder how long a dedicated gaming, like physical brick and mortar store is going to be able to survive if they're having to be that aggressive with this stuff. And I don't know how well they're actually doing, because with digital and everything, and also sites like Amazon, like I have to imagine their competition to get people to come in is just getting much more substantial. So we'll see what happens with GameStop in the coming years, but
Yeah,
I think we can all agree that they're not pleasant to really deal with.
yeah, and
well,
as an
and
aside,
it's
oh, go ahead, Ron. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, part of it I think is of their own making because I still will
Right.
occasionally buy games from brick and mortar stores. It's just that, the loyalty that GameStop might have built in 2008, they just went and chose to destroy in the past 7 or so years.
Right.
I was just going to say that, oddly enough, and I'm sure you guys have heard these reports that Amazon makes more money with their server farms than they do from, I think, their retail business. I think their retail business hasn't turned a profit in since Amazon formed. I think.
Right.
So I think it's very tough, for GameStop to compete on so many levels. I mean, with some
Yeah,
of these
Amazon's kind of unstoppable at this point. It's hard for anyone to compete with them.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the deal, and I guess in some ways our podcast is plugging Amazon, but like the
We are
pre-order
not
deal,
officially endorsed by Amazon.
Yeah.
We do not have.
but they have the pre-order thing where I think you get 10 or 15% off of a pre-order.
No, it's 20.
It's 20.
If you
Okay.
if you pre-order any physical video game and you have Amazon Prime, you get 20% off that pre-order.
Yeah, and then it's delivered on release day.
And
Yeah.
Best Buy has a membership program where they do the same thing, although you have to be a member of it.
So, speaking of which, my Amazon order of Sniper Elite 4 just shipped. It comes out on Tuesday.
On the games
also-
to play next.
Yeah. Yeah. The competition is definitely tough for the GameStops of the world.
All right, why don't we talk about the competition in online services?
Yeah. So another. It's weird how this came out, but I think it was just in an interview talking about the Switch. Someone at Nintendo basically just offhand mentioned the pricing for their online service, which that's been one of the big question marks for the Switch. Is like they've mentioned that it's going to require there will be a fee to pay online, which is similar to how Xbox Live Gold and PlayStation Plus operate. And both of those are $60 a year now, and they give you free games, and you need to subscribe to play multiplayer games. And Nintendo announced they were going to do that, which they have never been on that before. And the big question is, well, how's it all going to work? What's the pricing going to be? But in this, I don't know if it was an interview or a tweet or whatever, but they said that the price for Nintendo's online service would be they only gave Japanese prices, but they said it was going to be between 2,000 to 3,000 yen per year, which if you do a direct translation, that's about $17 to $26, but I would imagine they'd probably round up to 20 or 30. They usually get away with that kind of stuff between regions, but regardless, it's probably going to be max $30 per year, maybe potentially as low as 15, but probably 20 to 30, which in some ways feels like a decent price point because it is half as much as the others, but at the same time, it still remains to be seen how good are their servers going to be, how reliable is that stuff. The biggest question for me is actually I actually come down on the side that if it's $30 a year, I feel like that's too high unless they change stuff, because if you actually think about the number of Nintendo games that you want to play online, I don't think that justifies paying $30 a year. If you're paying $60 a year for Xbox Live Gold or PlayStation Plus, you're in theory playing at least a handful, if not dozens, of games online that make use of the online fee. Whereas Nintendo, it's during the course of the Wii U, I probably played Mario Kart, Splatoon, and a tiny bit of Smash Bros online, and I could have lived without the Smash Bros and maybe the other two as well. So it's the point there being Nintendo just doesn't put out a lot of online games. So I wonder if I'm curious if they'll end up making more online games for the Switch to kind of justify having a price, or maybe the price will help them make better servers. I don't know. To me, there's still a lot of unknowns there, and also the fact that you only get one virtual console game a month instead of the 4 to 6 that the other people do, and then you also don't keep that virtual console game as long as you're a subscriber. You literally only have access to it for that month. That also seems like a big knock against it. And then I guess kind of the final point there is that for whatever reason, Nintendo's online chat service and matchmaking and all of that stuff is going to be in a phone app instead of built into the actual console itself. So on top of paying this fee, you're going to have to go fiddle with this phone app to get all of that stuff working, which it just seems like an additional hurdle that I like. It baffles me why they went that route. Like, I don't know if they're just, yeah, I have no idea on that one, but I don't know. What do you guys like? I think I come down on the side of like, if it's $30 a year, that's too high, and like there's still a lot of unknowns here. I think that's the other big thing, but unless things are better than the Wii U was on the online front, like that almost still feels too high.
I mean, as in the last two podcasts, I guess the summary is basically like, A, wait and see, but B, like, Nintendo is, not really. It had an interesting product, or an interesting product potential, but it's coming out potentially underwhelming ways. But I mean, it's not all doom and gloom. Like, if it was $20 a month and they threw in Pokemon Bank and maybe some other services, and you got free Virtual Console, and they actually fixed their internet, which it sounds like with the phone app thing they're probably not going to do.
Probably not.
Then that certainly wouldn't be the end of the world. Like, that would be an acceptable in the modern day value proposition. But I guess we'll have to see. I'm kind of with you. $30 a month. Like, they probably won't include
30 a year.
30 a year. I'm sorry, 30 a year. They probably won't include some of the services and the limited Virtual Console. I guess it's not super expensive, but like you said, I played so few online games.
That's really the main thing I come back to. Yeah.
Doesn't. It is what it is.
Yeah, like if you can pay it by month, like I totally see myself just being like, well, I feel like playing, I don't know, just random example, Mario Kart. So like I'm gonna pay 1 month for this thing, play a little Mario Kart, and like never pay this fee again or something like that. I don't know if they'll have a monthly option, but yeah, it's just like if Nintendo doesn't have more online focused games, like it just doesn't. It's hard to imagine paying that fee year in year out. And I also wonder what kind of third-party support they'll get, because if they don't get any third-party help on multiplayer games, then it's still just going to be left in the scant few Nintendo offerings they have.
Yeah, for me on this front, I guess I can't say it really at this point it really kind of impacts me. I guess I'm in some ways in the Ryan camp, just because it's kind of so much of the whole wait and see thing. If anything comes out that I really would want to dive into, but at the same time, I guess perhaps in some ways I still haven't totally normalized the cost of the PlayStation online. Right. I mean, I've had this PlayStation 4 since release, and still every time it comes up, every time it says, "Oh, your year's about to run out," I'm like, "What am I doing?" I still don't feel like it's worth it in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And I guess I keep doing it because I do have friends that I play things with on the PS4. But I guess I'm still not happy about it. So I mean, almost anything, almost any amount of money at this point for me, maybe more than like $15-$20 seems exorbitant.
Yeah. And I'll also cop to, I don't feel like I get my $60 worth of PS Plus a year.
Yeah, and I mean the games, I guess,
I also play a lot on PC, so like maybe if I did, if I played more of my stuff on PS4, maybe it would be justified then. But
yeah, and there's so many games, and there's so many ways that you can use your time, just in general. That to me, like the free games that you get, I mean. I think a friend of mine made a joke basically that I think it was something like 2 or 3 months running where every free game was something that I had purchased,
Right.
Yeah. And
I've been in that. I've had that happen to me too.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like so I don't know. I mean, to me the free games, I mean, it's a nice perk. But to me, it's almost like a consolation prize. It's not like I'm paying for that content directly. It's sort of like, we're already screwing you, so let me just give you something to make it feel okay, or a little bit.
I don't know.
Every now and then it works out, like when you get a game that launches on PS Plus, like
Rocket League.
Obviously, Rocket League's the best example, but it's not the only one. There have been others that have done that too.
Mm-hmm.
It also, during the PS3 days, they did a lot more quote unquote AAA games, like like XCOM Enemy Unknown or BioShock Infinite or Borderlands 1 and 2. Like they did a lot more of those kind of games on PS Plus, which they don't seem to do as much anymore.
Right.
Steam
But
World was good. It seems like they usually have, maybe the quality is deteriorating a little bit, but they
there's
usually
still usually
do have
one good one a year or a
a,
month.
a handful of good titles that you get. And then, I mean, I'm not in love with the fee, but if it means the servers are good, and I've played who knows how
Yeah.
much Titanfall, like I will take a small fee for good servers, plus
Yeah.
a few free games. Like it's not ideal, but it's not like feel like
Yeah.
horrible about
That's
spending
a
that
that's a
money.
very good point. If this enables them to make, like, Sony's servers because multiplayer was free on PlayStation 3, and Sony's server reliability for multiplayer games got way better when they started introducing a fee. So like if this is something that enables more reliable services there, then yeah, I don't think it's the end of the world.
Yeah, so I mean, if PlayStation was offering to host dedicated servers for For Honor, then hey, we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. So yeah, I think you both make good points, and I think ultimately this will be a wait and see thing, exactly how it shapes out. Moving on from there, I don't know that we'll spend too much time on this, but was one of the biggest news items over the past few weeks. Is they somewhat had a settlement between the long-standing feud, if you will, between Oculus and ZeniMax. And I'm sure the story is not totally over, but they reached some kind of decision in court that Oculus is going to pay $500 million to ZeniMax, which, while a lot of money, I don't know what the actual amount was, but apparently that was only a fraction of what ZeniMax was asking for. So Oculus actually has tried to spin this as kind of a win in their favor, even though they're having to pay a ton of money. And I think they're also appealing that they shouldn't have to pay that much, and I think ZeniMax appealing that they should pay more. So like I said, this thing's probably far from over, but this is kind of like the first big milestone in this thing that's been going on for a long time. For anyone not familiar, just the very quick synopsis is that John Carmack used to work at id, who is owned by Bethesda, who is owned by ZeniMax. Left and joined Oculus, and basically ZeniMax has been claiming that stuff he did while at id under Bethesda has been implemented in the Oculus. So some amount of stealing code or technology or whatever. So it's been a whole big, long, ongoing thing. That's kind of the broad rundown. I don't know if there's necessarily a whole lot to say on that. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
I haven't been following it closely, although this gets into, I guess, the kind of murky waters of intellectual property, patent litigation, and NDAs. And I mean, the fact that who knows the details, like the fact that
Right.
Carmack was an employee of a company in a competitive industry or company, that's interesting. I mean, it means the case has legs to stand on. Like,
Right.
a lot of patent litigation is smoke and mirrors and extortion, basically modern day extortion. But if John Carmack was working on some sort of VR related thing at ZeniMax, like, that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, I don't know that he was, or maybe he would. Like, I wouldn't be surprised, because he's a guy who likes fiddling with technology. I wouldn't be surprised if, he could have just been tinkering with stuff while there. Who knows?
Right. Really hard to
yeah,
say. And I mean, of course, the details of the case are very obscured, like, especially coming from somebody who's not looking at all the court information. But
yeah, I don't know what is made public, but whatever is public, I have not certainly dug through all the details. And you're absolutely right that there's like a whole lot of murky legal stuff going here, and I'm also not a lawyer, so I don't always understand it all. I guess the one interesting like I mean, other than this just being like a huge feud between two very large gaming companies, um, like it'll be interesting to see like or I'll be curious to see if that has any impact going forward on what those two companies do, because like this is a lot of money on the line. Um, Especially given that VR is still kind of in the early stages. Like, depending on how this thing shakes out, it could have a big impact on Oculus and what they're doing. And Oculus has been obviously one of the biggest faces of VR. So, in a way, this could end up impacting VR as a whole in some ways. It's still unsure exactly how that's going to shape out.
ZeniMax, do they have a particular stake in the Vive or any of the other VR technologies?
Not that I'm aware of. I feel like when I was reading through some of these stories that there was some allusion to the fact that ZeniMax maybe at one point was either considering or had an opportunity to get invested in Oculus and passed it up. So it was funny because so also coming from all this is a whole lot of hilarious like finger pointing and like, bickering kind of quotes. So like a lot of people saying like ZeniMax has sour grapes over missing a chance for this before Facebook bought Oculus and all this other stuff. But to my knowledge, no, I don't believe ZeniMax actually has any current like VR product.
Yeah, and again, it gets into, the unfortunate thing about patent and IP protection is, I mean, on the surface, it's a good thing, right? You build a technology, you own it, like, and somebody goes out and markets it, which, we don't, it sounds like that may not have been the case here with ZeniMax, and that's where all the gray area comes in. But like,
right.
At the same time, it's kind of like, what is their end game and what are they getting into? Like,
yeah.
I mean, in some ways, the best outcome for them might just be to ruin Oculus. And it's like, great job, guys. Like, you just destroyed this like fairly innovative, kickstarted VR product. Like, way to build goodwill.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Yeah, I mean their angle on their case is obviously like around Carmack breaking NDAs or taking code or assets or whatever. But yeah, like what is their ultimate goal, just to get money out of this? Or yeah, like it's hard to say for sure, at least from what I understand. But yeah, that's about all I had to say on that. Unless you guys have other stuff on that one.
Not in particular. I mean, it does come on the heels of Bethesda, doing that real sweet,
right.
no review copy thing.
Right.
So they're just building goodwill left and right, really.
Yep. they really are.
Bethesda and ATACS.
Yep. Yeah.
Called them out. It's like, wait, what did they do this week?
Yeah, we'll just keep the.
Let's get them, guys.
We'll have to add a Bethesda /ZeniMax section to our podcast. Yeah, it's a huge legal mess and ramifications to be determined in full. I'm gonna give a shout out to two other stories that are interesting, but I don't know that we'll have a whole lot to say about. The PS4 has gotten a new firmware update that adds a handful of things, but the two most notable things I guess are it now supports external hard drives. You could already replace the internal hard drive with bigger ones if you wanted, but it now supports external ones, which is always nice. And then apparently also with this patch, the PS4 Pro now has access to a boost mode, which apparently will make any game. So like when the Pro came out, games have to have like a base mode and a Pro mode, new games going forward. But any old game that's not required to get updated for the Pro mode, apparently this boost mode will make those games just run better. So adding a little more value to the Pro for people who end up jumping on the PS4 Pro. So that's kind of nice. And then the other quick shout out that we thought was amusing is apparently they're working on Netflix and I guess Konami have teamed up to work on a Castlevania show for Netflix. No idea when that's coming out or if it's animated or live action, but hey, Netflix has been doing good stuff, and I'm not sure exactly what approach they'll take with Castlevania, but
Yeah.
I'll be curious to see where that goes.
There was an interesting article in the Atlantic last week that was talking about, I think basically this new Resident Evil movie that's come out, and they're basically the article kind of tries to sort of explore kind of the past of video game movies in general. And of course it mentions some of the notable facts are, one, I think the only video game movie to ever be considered a success in the United States was the very first Tomb Raider movie with Angelina Jolie. They also, of course, mentioned that Warcraft was a dismal failure in the States, but then made its money back overseas. But
probably
then,
China.
Yeah, I think. But it said that it was
That's
talking
where
about,
Blizzard makes their money these days.
but it was talking about with respect to this new Assassin's Creed game or movie that came out recently with Michael Fassbender and these. It seems like they're not stopping with the whole let's see if we can finally make these video games into movies, and of course there are some sacred cows that have been rumored but never come through. I think there's been rumors over the years of a Final Fantasy, or not a Final Fantasy, but like a BioShock game or like a Half-Life game. Those have never materialized.
That would be pretty sweet.
But basically the article's doing some speculative work on why it might be that these things just can't really ever make it. So for some further reading of that on that topic, it might be an interesting read.
Yeah. And there was also an interview with the guy who's like heading, I forget his name, but the guy who's heading up the Castlevania thing. There was actually, I saw a long interview with him where he kind of touched on that as well. Like he was actually like, he seemed really excited, which, I mean, some of this could just be marketing speak, who knows. But like he was basically like, yeah, video game movies and shows have been terrible, and he's like, and he like went into all these reasons why he thought why, and he seems excited to try and change that with this Castlevania thing. So yeah, it has been a weird, like, just long-standing thing of like video game adaptations to TV or movies. It is a really curious thing of like why that just has not worked.
Well, I mean, to be fair, like, some of them, a handful have been good. I mean, like Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, I thought was a really fun movie.
Yeah, that was entertaining. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean it partly.
Was that a
I
motion
guess
picture or was that an anime?
It was a CG, like
Right,
animated
right.
CG.
It was basically anime.
Yeah, however you want to call that. I don't think it's technically anime. I think it's an animated film or something like that.
Yeah.
But it actually followed the game's story, and a lot of adaptations just kind of loosely take
I've also thought it's
setting.
weird. Yeah, I've also thought it's weird that a lot of things that have made the transition, like your Resident Evils and Tomb Raider, and like they even made a Doom movie, and like there were the Mortal Kombat movies. Like these are not story-focused games that they're translating. There was a Postal movie. Like
Popular.
Yeah, there was a Dead or Alive movie. It's like the vast majority of the video games that have been translated to other stuff are games that don't really lend themselves to a lot of material to work with.
Yeah. And there's actually been some really interesting. There's an interesting background to what you're discussing. So if our listeners want to learn a little bit more about it, they would probably need to look into Uwe Boll, UWEBO, and because he is one of the main offenders with this thing, and also the way that movies are funded in Germany, to where he can get people to fund his films, and because it's sort of part of this sort of arts, I guess, initiative that's in Germany, those people don't necessarily. I think it's either like tax deductible or like they can write off like the profits of the film or something. So but somehow he's been able to finagle this system where he always has people to fund his monies or his movie, and they don't take a loss if the movie is unsuccessful. So I can't remember all of the details on that, but it has to do with a policy put forth by the German government on the arts. But it's kind of fascinating.
It's interesting
because there are a ton of terrible video games that he has made.
Yeah, probably like half of the video game movies in existence, including most of the bad ones, have been Uwe Boll joints.
Yeah. So it's an interesting saga.
Yeah, it's weird. And another fun plug, Ryan Davis on GiantBomb.com, once upon a time, did quote unquote reviews of every video game movie that existed at the time, and those were quite hilarious videos to watch.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Yeah, you can still find those on the site.
Nice.
That's about all I had for news.
There are more Blood Rain movies than there are Blood Rain games. There's a Far Cry movie,
I've heard of like one
Postal,
of them.
Alone in the Dark.
Double Dragon.
Yeah.
There's a Hitman.
And a lot of
Silent
a lot
Hill.
of
Max
these
Payne.
movies you're naming are like
Max Payne.
B-rated, like really terrible. Like no wonder they're unsuccessful. They're like B-rated to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I was saying earlier is like why these were the properties that were chosen to make a video game like that or to make into a movie like is weird. Like yeah, I feel like they could have taken better.
The horror
picks.
genre is always looking for
Yeah.
thing to put.
Yeah, which speaking of like House of the Dead and Alone in the Dark are other ones that have been made into movies. It's like just weird. And then of course there's the infamous Super Mario Bros. Movie. But I think that's gonna do it for news.
We're adults talk about cool stuff, right?
Right. Yeah. So these movie video game movies are obviously the coolest
Let's
of
get
cool.
out of the dumps, guys. I'm feeling down.
So to wrap up this thing, yeah, we're going to talk about what we've been playing next, and also we're entering the. It's funny that in the past few years, like the first quarter of the year has actually become just as busy, if not some years even busier than like the fall season. So there's a lot of games coming out soon. So we'll take a slightly different tack this week. I'm going to ask each of you what you're going to be playing next over the next week or two, and also what big games you're looking forward to coming out in February, March, and maybe even into April. So, Mr. Will, we'll start with you. What you got on your plate coming up?
Well, probably going to finish Origami. Probably going to play a little bit more of this Heroes game. And then, for the time being, I'm going to just keep plugging away at this Metal Gear. We're going to see kind of where we go. In the near future, I'm probably going to I'm going to hop on board a co-op train and play Sniper Elite 4. I'm interested in terms of this month, probably in terms of single player, Horizon Zero Dawn. Also, Halo Wars 2 comes out this month. Could be an interesting thing. And then next month, there is Mass Effect Andromeda that I'm probably the most interested in, I would say.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. What about you, Ryan?
Plan to continue and very likely finish Final Fantasy II and Cook Serve Delicious. There's a good chance. I started Majora's Mask last year and put it down to knock out a few 2016 games for GOTY chat, so there's a good chance I'll pick that one back up and start plugging away at it. Aside from that, I'm not sure what I'll play in the near future, but as far as games coming out or which have come out, the River City Ransom Underground game looks pretty exciting. That is a long-awaited sequel, or
30 years in the making.
So that one could very well land on my radar. I think you were showing me. I don't know if this is coming out soon, but Into the Breach. That trailer looked interesting.
Yeah, I don't know that they had a date for that one, but
yeah. Horizon and Breath of the Wild, Horizon Zero Dawn, Zelda, Breath of the Wild, those, I don't know that I'll get to them soon, but those are both pretty exciting. And I've also heard good things about Resident Evil 7, about Neo. These are games which have come out already, I believe.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff out right now.
Yeah, this is one of the busiest times of the year, weirdly enough. Does that about cover it? Sorry, I didn't mean to
no, that's a long rambly list of games which I may or may not play.
Is that enough games for you?
That is more than enough.
Yeah, my plate's gonna be full as well. So I'll probably keep poking at Limelight, but the main game I'm gonna start is I have acquired Neo, and that's gonna be the next big thing I jump into. Um, so I'm definitely looking forward to that. That thing seemed to turn out pretty good. Coming up, um, definitely looking forward to Horizon and Zelda and Mass Effect, as you guys have mentioned. Those are three big ones on my plate. And then right at the start of April, of course, there is Persona 5, which I'm certainly looking forward to. So over the next month and a half to 2 months, that's a lot of big games. I have no idea how those are going to fit in, but those are all ones I'm interested in, for sure. And I didn't hear you say For Honor, Will. You're not on that no dedicated servers train?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Comes out in 2 days.
And I'm trying to sort of, you know, I've tried to stay in the competitive multiplayer space, but I don't know, as time passes, I realize more and more that it may not be where I'm happiest. So we'll see, but I wouldn't be surprised if I did not pick it up.
Yeah. I'm just giving you a hard time. But that's a lot of big games coming out in the next few months, and I'm sure some other surprises will pop up in there as well. But yeah, Neo is next for me.
All right.
And, I think that's gonna about wrap up this podcast. Thanks everyone for listening. I am Flex from Raleigh, and joining me is Ryan from New York and Will from Greenville, North Carolina. And with that, we are going to sign off. See you next time.